There is a certain type of character that has appeared numerous times throughout Warriors history. The outspoken and mean member of a clan who serves either to encourage aggression and antagonize certain members of their clan against the leader's wishes, or to personally pick on the protagonist and make them feel isolated and wrong. In recent years, the team has seemingly just picked a name from a hat whenever they need a clanmate to be xenophobic or antagonize the protagonists, making it appear sometimes as if every cat in the clans is like this. But even in recent years, there have been some characters seemingly designed to be nothing but a bully. We have Cherryfall to Sunbeam, Kite Scratch and Turtlecrawl for Rootspring, and Skyheart to Leopardstar. And back in the first arc, we even had Longtail and Darkstripe, along with Dustpaw and Sandpaw to different degrees. However, arguably the most famous examples come from my favorite era, Power of Three to Omen of the Stars. Berrynose, Thornclaw, and, as I'll be talking about today, Spiderleg. These cats are positioned in the story to be outlying voices, the few cruel or aggressive cats who are willing to stand up against the benevolent leader's decisions or mercilessly mock innocent protagonists so that the rest of the clan can stay pure and kind. They create the inter-clan conflict in a way that standard nice characters and grand-scale villains usually can't. And for the most part, these characters tend to just stay in the wrong for their entire existences. Sandpaw, Longtail, and, to an extent, Dustpaw all developed to the point where they understood their behavior and values were wrong. But after the first series, the idea of these stock, mean clan members growing or changing was more or less abandoned. And since the new team took over, we've never even focused on a background cat like them for more than a book, so development has been out of the question. However, between the extremes of Kite Scratch and Longtail, we have Spiderleg. He had a minor amount of characterization in the new prophecy, which we'll talk about, but from Power of Three onwards, he was solidified as a cat that no reader was supposed to empathize with, not just in his values or behavior, but in his relationships as well. Much like Thornclaw, Spiderleg isn't a character with a great amount of range in the characterization we actually see from him in the books. But if you put together everything we know about him, in the disparate elements thrust into his character for convenience, there is something interesting to examine. To do that, though, we'll have to start from the beginning. In Firestar's Quest, Greystripe's Vow, and A Thief and ThunderClan, Spiderkit and Shrewkit are portrayed as just a pair of kittens. They're Ferncloud and Dustpelt's first litter, and mirror each other in behavior consistently. They play fight with each other and ignore their parents' directions at the annoyance of older warriors. Spiderkit, interestingly enough, spends 2 of his appearances in 2 different books imagining that he is fighting or driving out BloodClan, implying some of the stories he has been taught this early in life. Still, none of this was especially deep or telling for their future characterizations. Spiderpaw's real story begins in the New Prophecy, where he is apprenticed to Mousefur alongside Shrewpaw and Whitepaw. These 3 spend a lot of time together, and while Whitepaw is essentially the perfect apprentice, Spiderpaw is a little too playful for Mousefur's liking, and sometimes gets distracted by the world around him, enough to miss out on important lessons or prey. After missing one particular piece, and determined to prove himself to Mousefur, Spiderpaw ran straight after a squirrel that had already been scared off. We don't know how that particular hunt went, but Mousefur wasn't impressed at all with his ability to follow instructions or get a hunt right the first time. The only apprentice Spiderpaw definitely surpasses is Squirrelpaw, who gets chided by Dustpelt at least once a day. As the arc goes on, Spiderpaw continues spending a lot of time with Whitepaw and Shrewpaw, though is more often seen alone with Whitepaw than alone with Shrewpaw. And in this time, although we don't see his thoughts on it, Ferncloud and Dustpelt give him a younger litter of siblings, 2 of whom die of starvation in different moons, and Shrewpaw is killed on the Thunderpath trying to get a squirrel, which Whitepaw is devastated about. Again, we don't have any of Spiderpaw's reactions throughout this, but imagining him as a whole person rather than a part of a plot, it must have had an effect on him, and we'll cover what I think that is in a short while. As the clans reach the lake, Spiderpaw gets so excitable that he almost falls into the hollow and breaks his neck, having to be chastised by Squirrelpaw of all cats to watch where he's going. He makes a joke with his dad later too, when he's handing out orders, but Dustpelt isn't amused. Mousefur also starts continuously being referred to as old, slow, or not well enough, indicating how close she is to becoming an elder. Then, completely off-screen, Spiderpaw apparently chased away a young fox from the camp, getting him enough credit to become a warrior. Spiderleg's promotion, the first at the new lake camp, where Firestar declares a rule that apprentices aren't allowed at the edges of the cliff, a rule that won't apply to him soon, is a big tipping moment. It's not just the coming of adulthood for Spiderleg, but the separation from the last partner he always counted on, Whitepaw, the mentor who always kept him in line, Mousefur, and the lessened responsibility that comes with being an apprentice. Spiderleg is honored for his courage and enthusiasm, but I wonder if that may have sat badly with him as he took his vigil. At his ceremony, his parents looked hopefully upon their, notably, eldest son, and Mousefur, old and sick, was made an elder. The old warrior code story about why warriors sit vigils on the nights of their ceremony told of the meditation cats were supposed to go through, a night of thinking about the responsibility they now hold, and the ways in which they'll have to change internally to become adults in their clan. Spiderleg was enthusiastic, but had that helped him hunt well enough to save Hollykit or Largekit from starvation? Had that saved Shrewpaw, who specifically died chasing after more prey? Would it even have saved himself, a foolhardy apprentice that caused Firestar to instate a rule around apprentices in the cliff? Was Spiderleg the enthusiastic, a cat who could live up to the hopes of Dustpelt and Ferncloud for their remaining oldest kit? Would he live up to Mousefur, the strict, confident, competent warrior who he had so often blown off? Spiderleg was courageous, yes, but maybe that courage needed to be directed elsewhere. Playtime is over. The world is serious and dangerous, and if you spend too much time being distracted, you'll miss the chance to protect those closest to you. It was time to listen to Mousefur more. Mousefur. She's famous for being a grouchy old elder or a background warrior in her youth, but she's also deeply xenophobic and sharp, enough to call a clan meeting to complain about all the outsider blood in the clan. Spiderleg's later behavior makes a lot more sense when considering the lessons he was probably getting from her. Spiderleg doesn't spend much time with Whitepaw anymore as a warrior. Instead, his social circle consistently becomes Ashfur, Thornclaw, and, for a short time, Squirrelflight, two other older warriors who were strict and serious in the way his mentor was, and the cat who somehow managed to surpass him through her time on the journey. Also, in a rare moment for warriors, he, a background character, is given a reason to think ill of a protagonist. Spiderleg tried catching a fish to get extra prey for ThunderClan, and Brambleclaw stepped in to insult his technique and say that he knew exactly how to fish thanks to his special lessons with Feathertail on their special StarClan journey. Then, when Spiderleg, Ashfur, and Squirrelflight later see Brambleclaw acting as the deputy without being given the position, Spiderleg makes a couple of barbed comments about how bossy and presumptuous that Tom is. And he's right. From the evidence Spiderleg has, that is exactly what Brambleclaw is being. Through Mousefur's values, Dustpelt's curt attitude, and Brambleclaw's stuck-up comments, it's easy to see why Spiderleg may have changed. He was also one of the first cats to meet Daisy when she came with her kits to ThunderClan, and he even carried one of them back to camp next to her. In Power of Three, he becomes one of those kits' mentors, Mousepaws. I wonder if he found any irony in his xenophobic mentor and his non-clan-born apprentice sharing the same name. By this point in time, Spiderleg has fully reached the characterization he's famous for. He's loud, argumentative, and very serious. He no longer makes mistakes while out on patrol, and Dustpelt no longer has to chide him for anything. He even starts speaking up about clan politics, including the lack of loyalty that outsiders like Stormfur have to ThunderClan. Stormfur specifically may have caught his ire due to being Brambleclaw's friend from the journey, and Feathertail's brother. That said, he doesn't have a phenomenal time as a mentor either. Mousepaw seems just as foolhardy as Spiderleg could once be, climbing far too high in the sky oak to try and impress his mentor. But even as the danger for Mousepaw increases, Spiderleg stops other cats from stepping in to stop him, saying that if Mousepaw wants to do it, they should let him. He may have been trying to give his apprentice the freedom he didn't have under Mousefur, but it's also letting his apprentice put himself in danger as Spiderleg once did to himself. It may sound like he doesn't care about Mousepaw then, but seeing how defensive he becomes around Brackenfur and Cloudtail, it's clear that he does. Even in being a mentor, what Spiderleg is really trying to do is still impress other cats and live up to the image of what he considers a clan cat to be. He needs his apprentice to be the best because it would mean that he's been a good mentor. Spiderleg spends almost all of his time with Mousepaw after that, taking him on every patrol and including him in every conversation about how dangerous or stuck-up the other clans are being. Mousepaw parrots Spiderleg's words a few times, but it's hard to tell in all what he thinks of his aggressive mentor. This continues even as, suddenly, Daisy has Spiderleg's kits. We never saw the two of them together since they met, but whatever may have happened, even after the kits were born, Spiderleg continued training Mousepaw daily, even refusing his dad's offer to swap out so he could visit his kits. Jpaw thinks Spiderleg is awkward around them, as if he couldn't adjust to being a father. Let's take a quick pause. Spiderleg, thus far, has been defined by the idea of expectations. He was a reckless and energetic apprentice who got distracted, consistently failed to catch prey, and didn't live up to the training of his mentor or father. He was a subpar warrior, still missing prey or being insulted about his technique by his father or Brambleclaw, and who nearly killed himself making the same mistake as Squirrelflight. Since he had some time to settle into the job of a warrior, though, he has done his best to agree with his father, emulate his and Mousefer's attitudes, speak up against clan issues that both of them had, and most recently, become a model mentor to one of the kids he first took back to camp for Daisy. It's difficult to say what Spiderleg's real feelings may be at this point. Maybe he doesn't have any core values of his own around the politics of the clan, beyond maybe not liking Brambleclaw. This isn't to say that anything he's done, or is about to do, is correct. His recklessness and need to appear like Dustpelt and Thornclaw have not only emotionally hurt Stormfur and Millie, along with likely his own apprentice and mate, but have also physically hurt Mousepaw. However, if you imagine him as a complete person rather than a grab bag of traits used for the convenience of the plot, it is easy to get an idea of why he acts as poorly as he does. He's not necessarily malicious, but he had some very poor role models based on a clan culture and code that rewards this sort of aggression. And being who he was naturally as a child has only gotten him and everyone around him hurt. We must ask then, a question that is never answered by the text. Why did Spiderleg and Daisy get together, even if only for a short while? It's clear that this was an accidental relationship for Spiderleg. He still considers himself an unfinished, immature fake, in some sense, and just led to his apprentice and Daisy's kit being hurt. I think this is a pretty classic case of Spiderleg not considering himself adult enough on the inside to start parenting himself. Why did he fall for Daisy then? Well, if his against-outsider ideology is mostly just carried over from Mousefer, Dustpelt, and Thornclaw, he may not have the disdain for her that we'd expect. And in fact, I have evidence in a minute that he doesn't. Perhaps, since they met just after he became a warrior and he quickly took responsibility for her kits on the way back to camp, Daisy saw him as mature, strong, a protector in some sense. Perhaps Spiderleg liked having someone who didn't know him as a reckless apprentice, who believed he was always the cat he was trying to become. Seeing as Daisy just moved to the clans and away from a mate who ignored her, maybe Spiderleg seemed like a good cat to trust, who spent time with her and enjoyed her company. This would, of course, make their relationship even more difficult, though, because Spiderleg doesn't consider himself to be that cat at all. He would now want to keep up the act for her so she still respects him, but also be increasingly uncomfortable with the distance between who she sees him as and who he really is or believes himself to be. And on Daisy's side, while her spending time with him could have made him happy, it would also be built almost exclusively on Daisy being able to prop up Spiderleg's ego. Basically, I don't think this relationship was an honest one, and in my most realistic, though still not canon because nothing here is canon, assessment of the situation, these two were never on equal paws, and their distance only grew once Rosekit and Toadkit were born. Throughout Eclipse, Spiderleg's main appearances all have to do with these relationships. He scolds Rosekit and Toadkit for playfighting loudly and complains to Graystripe about how hard kits are to manage. He takes his tail away from Toadkit when he tries to play with it. He notably defends Daisy from Soul, saying she's a part of ThunderClan now and shouldn't be thought of as an outsider, which would be the evidence I mentioned. However, when he is later called off to battle and Daisy asks him to be careful and tries to re-establish their relationship, he ignores her. Spiderleg is in a confusing state, because he clearly doesn't want to participate in this relationship or family, and in doing so, he is hurting Daisy and his kits deeply. But for Daisy specifically, he does still appreciate her enough to not want her hurt in public. I attribute this to the same sort of defensive attitude he had around Mousepaw's prowess. Daisy is connected to him, permanently now, so if someone, especially an outsider like Soul, tries to insult her, he has to defend her. But he isn't comfortable with the close relationship Daisy wants, because he doesn't want and never wanted kits. A lot of his story so far has been very self-focused, following his values, role models, wants, and insecurities while ignoring or overruling the feelings and desires of cats like Brambleclaw, Stormfur, Millie, Mousewhisker, Daisy, and now Rosekit and Toadkit. We can understand why he may have acted in the way he did, but it doesn't make it right. So, in a story that recognizes him as wrong, we'd expect for someone to show him, soon, just how much harm he has done. And for once in Warriors, in Long Shadows, they do, at least in part. Spiderleg was both injured and sick for a long time, leaving him in the medicine den and unable to just run away with his apprentice, now a warrior, or on patrols to antagonize the other clans. Daisy frets over him during this time, and though he doesn't need the attention, he also doesn't have the energy or wellness to refuse, and no one is asking Daisy, presumed his mate, to leave when she is worried about him. At this point, Daisy finally sits Spiderleg down for a talk about how he should spend more time with his kits, about how they and she are worried about him. She considers it a wonder that her kits care about him at all, considering how he ignores them. Spiderleg responds hesitantly that it's not that he's not interested, he just thinks Daisy will do fine raising them alone. Daisy asks if that's because she's raised kits alone before, which she and he know full well wasn't her choice. Here we just about have confirmation that Daisy has told Spiderleg what her relationship with Smokey was like. Daisy pleads for him to pay attention because if he doesn't step in, he'll miss the chance to be a part of his kids' lives at all. Then she stalks away, and Leafpool steps in to say that the chance to be a parent is a precious gift. While Spiderleg briefly becomes defensive again, he eventually, finally, says something honest. He explains that he never planned on having kids, that he feels useless and clumsy around them, and that he feels judged by everyone since things didn't work out with Daisy. Leafpool, clearly projecting, chides him for punishing the kits for things not working out with Daisy. He is still their father, and he needs to learn to act like one, to ensure that he cherishes them with every breath. She then demands that Spiderleg eat the vole Daisy brought for him. This is all very revealing, and Leafpool isn't wrong, all in all. Spiderleg says things went badly with Daisy, as if it's a fact, when Daisy clearly still wants to be close to him and didn't agree to a separation. Especially one where he gets to ignore the kits while she raises them alone. Spiderleg is uncomfortable and doesn't feel ready, but this is a real situation he is in now, and if he wants a different setup than what he and Daisy currently have, or what the clan expects, he needs to communicate about it openly, which he also doesn't want to do. Interacting at all with Daisy or the kits would require opening himself up in a way he really hasn't since he became a warrior. So even with Leafpool's encouragement, he doesn't really. For the rest of the arc, and books beyond it, most of his time is spent being aggressive, defensive, quick to anger around the other clans, and especially quick to blame WindClan and wish to fight them when Ashfur turns up dead at their border. However, there is one extremely short scene while he is sick where Rosekit and Toadkit are seen playing on top of him while he pretends to be a badger and Daisy watches over their game. This is the singular example in the series of him interacting with his kits, and for all intents and purposes, it is where the plotline ends. He is more kind to apprentices in the future, both recognizing Dovepaw's potential despite her poor performance in her assessment, and being firm but not cruel or reckless with Amberpaw when he later mentors her. But mostly, Spiderleg continued to be used as the clan's loudmouth on issues around borders and the other clans. I'm sure, from the Erins' point of view, Spiderleg's story felt finished at the end of Power of Three. He had a short arc about learning to let his kits into his life and not ignore Daisy despite his discomfort, was used as a parallel for Leafpool's feelings around abandoning her kits for their own good, and he ended up learning to become a father regardless of his reservations. But between never again being seen with his kits and continuing to play the instigator role that he took up by emulating Thornclaw and Dustpelt, it often feels like he didn't make the sort of growth that Sunrise implied he did. And of course, none of his attitudes towards the other clans or outsiders were ever challenged, more than protagonists thinking he may be wrong. So even after his death, it would be very hard to find many Warriors fans who genuinely liked the guy. I didn't personally pay him much thought at all until, Paws of Stars pre-planning, as I can say for many cats. But putting together all of Spiderleg's past, role models, behavior, rationale, and especially his effects or presumable effects on the cats around him, it paints a picture of a very unfinished arc. I think what he really needed is either to consistently spend more time with his kits and grow to understand what being a parent means for him, or have a confrontation with his kits later in life to discuss what effect his inaction had on them, and teach him that his decisions affected more than his own life. In either case, though, he also needed a point where he could understand how his politics and aggression came from a poor place as well. Ideally, one where he could come to understand what clan values really cause, and how his opinions may have impacted the clanmates he tries to protect. But, that isn't what happened in canon, and a lot of the conclusions I've drawn about who Spiderleg even is are headcanons based on disparate actions and words that the Erins might not have ever kept track of or put together. Ultimately, Spiderleg is just a background character, an instigator of conflict and a poor maiden father who may or may not have ever changed. But I still consider that better than pulling a random name out of a hat each time you need someone to spout cruel words for the sake of the plot. At least I have some clue who Spiderleg might be. Thank you for watching, and always remember that your environment will shape you, but to improve, you also need to shape yourself.